In order to add the testing framework to our project, we need to click at the top level. So notice the scorekeeper. And then over here on the right, notice that you have we have the project listed at the top, and then we have targets. Right now we have a target that is running on iOS devices. And if we want to add another target, we can click this plus down here at the bottom. And what we're looking for is referred to as the unit testing bundle, and it's this one down here at the very bottom under the tests. And so go ahead and choose next, and we'll keep the name, and we've got the project, and go ahead and choose finish. So now it's added another target, and the reason we use targets is so that you can compile and run this without actually having to run the entire app. And so here on the left we have these folders, and we've got additional things so that we can run just the tests, and it will build it and run it, and it's separate from the actual application. So when you go to deploy your application to the App Store, you're building just the main application, and you don't have to worry about the tests, but the tests can be run while you're developing the application. If we take a look at this, it's got a few new things that we haven't seen before. We have this @test annotation, which means that this is a function that will run as a test method whenever when this target is run. And then you have a keyword async and throws. And those are features that are used in the Swift language when you're dealing with concurrency, whether you're waiting for things to happen on the network or if it throws an error. So when you're dealing with error handling. We're not going to cover those in this tutorial, but there's plenty to read up on. And the tutorial references some additional things if you want to look into more about testing. For our purposes, let's go ahead and change this a little bit. You can add, you can pass in a name to the test where it says, we're going to say reset player scores. And this string is used so you can actually see when you're running the test, you can see which one is being run. And then we want to change this function name to reset scores. At the top of the file, we want to import the scorekeeper. We need to use another keyword called @testable, and then import, and finally we want to import scorekeeper, which is the project that our application is. So what this does is it allows us to reference code in the project and allows us to run tests against it. Whenever we write tests, we need to initialize the code that we're testing. So if we're passing, in this case, we're testing the reset scores method, we need to create a scoreboard object and players, and then we're going to call the method, and then we're going to make what they call an assertion. We're going to use certain testing methods that will say, when this runs based on this information I expect this result. So the first thing we'll do, let's go ahead and delete this comment, and let's create a variable called scoreboard, and we'll create a new scoreboard and pass in players, and we're going to have an array of players. And so we'll say player, we'll say Elisha, and a score of 0, and then a comma, and then we'll have another player. And remember, I'm just using the tab key to auto-complete, and then it jumps to the next value that needs to be filled in, so I'm kind of going through it a little quickly. But remember, if you press the tab key, then it jumps to the next value that it's expecting, and in our case, we'll go ahead and set that to 5. And then from here, we'll call the method on scoreboard.resetScores2, and then pass in a value. After we call that method, then we're going to go through and we're going to loop through each player. So we're going to say for player in scoreboard.players, we're going to there's the hash symbol and then expect, And what we're checking is that the player.score equals 0. So again, what's happening is we're referencing, we'll talk about these errors here in 1 second, but for now what we're doing is we are looping through each player, and then we call the expect method, which is a test which asserts that the player score is going to be equal to 0. So that's the test. That's what we're evaluating to make sure that our code is working. Now, when it talks about this instance method, what needs to happen, what we need to fix this is we just need to say await. Okay, so the tutorial doesn't mention this, but looking up online, it's referring to, because we're referencing Swift 6, it's expecting this await call, because I don't know the exact details. I'll have to look into it. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but for now, if you want to get rid of those warnings, you can just pass in await. Let's go ahead and run these tests. Now remember, this method, reset scores, doesn't actually work because we don't have anything in it. But the reason we're writing the tests first is so that when the tests run, we know they're going to fail. So to run the test, you can say product and then choose test. Now when it runs for the first time, it's going to build the application, and then it's going to run it, and it's going to be running it in the simulator, and so it may take a little longer the first time you run this. Notice up here, you'll see kind of the status. And so again, the first time it runs, it's going to build the application, install it on the simulator, and then it's going to run it. And so here, it failed, which is what we expected. And then if you come up here, you can kind of see where it failed. And it's saying it expected 0, but it got 5. So it obviously didn't reset it. Let's jump over to the scoreboard and let's implement this. So we're going to have a for loop. We're going to say for index in 0 ... less than players count. And then for each one of these, we're going to say players index score equals 0. What it's doing, the way this for loop works is we have this index, which is a variable, and the index is going to start at 0. And so the first time it runs, this is accessing the players array and is saying, give me player at index 0 and check their score and set it equal to 0. So Elisha is the first player, so their index is 0. Then it's going to go until it's 1 less than the players.count. Remember, in the previous video, I talked about the index, the array. A Swift array is 0 based, meaning the first index in an array is 0, and then the next value is 1, and the next value is 2. When you say .count, it returns the number of elements in the array. Well, the total number of the elements is 3, but we don't have an index value that is number 3. So we want to reference, we want to go from 0 to less than the player count. So 1 less than that, so that is 0, 1, 2. And so now that will reset each score. So let's go back and let's run the test again. Again, the second time you run it, it goes faster because the app is already running. So now if we jump over here to our tests, you'll see that you get these green indicators, and that means that all the tests have passed. For our testing, you could, write multiple tests and pass in for each value. So let's say you wanted to test against certain values. Instead of writing multiple functions, what we're going to do is we're going to pass in various parameters to the same function to test against each value. So to set that up, what we need to do is in our reset scores, we want to be able to pass in a value. So we're going to say new value, which is of type int. And then where we're referencing it, we're going to say we want to set the value to new value here, and then set it to new value right here. Now, we've got an error because when we call this method, we don't actually have any parameters. And so to fix that, we use what's called an arguments. And so we say arguments, and then we pass in an array of arguments. So in our case, we're going to say 0, 10, and 20. So now we can run this test, and it's going to run it as many, for however many arguments we have, which we have 3. So it's going to run it 3 times. And then let's see how that works. When we test this again, let's notice what happens. Okay, notice that it has failed. Now the reason for that is because we haven't updated the reset scores to take that new value properly. So at the moment, what happens is when we reset the score, we reset the score to a 0. And so the first test passes. Notice it has the green check, but the other tests, when it checks against 10 or 20, it fails. If we fix that, we go back to the scoreboard. And again, notice here, the method was setting everything to 0, but now we want it to set it to new value. Go ahead and run the tests again. So click product and test. And now notice the test succeeded. If you come over to the test tab, notice all 3 iterations of that, all 3 arguments have passed.